In today's class, we will be dealing with the role of public spaces in the urban areas. First of all, it is important to understand the urban morphology and the evolution of the cities in the medieval times and as well as in the contemporary times and in the present times to see how the resultant public spaces became necessity as well as the importance of its role in the urban spaces. So we will also be seeing the various urban spaces and the various types of public spaces and how different is it from the open spaces, and we will see some case studies of the transformation of spaces to usable public spaces. So first let's see on the urban morphology of the cities from the Greek to the Roman medieval towns as well as your Renaissance cities and the industrialization and the city growth which enabled many modern concepts such as industrial, city beautiful movement, garden city, Radburn concept, neighborhood planning, city nouveau and the radiant city concepts. So first, urban morphology is a study of the form of the human settlements and the process of its formation and transformation. So it is the human settlements that take a form and transform into something else, into a spatial structure with a character, into a metropolitan area or a city or a town or a village, only by examining its patterns of growth. So, this urban structure, the spatial arrangement of the urban public spaces, and the arranged effects have a lot of implications on accessibility, environmental sustainability, social equity, safety, and cultural creativity and economics of many cities. So the public spaces have an arrangement implication as well as a physical implication on the spatial structure of the urban city. So the urban city first took its shape from Greece, Rome, and many other medieval towns. So in Greece, if you see the difference between the cities of Greece and cities of Rome, it's powerfully assertive and fortified hilltop and sacred present. This was the main functions of a Greek city, whereas in Roman city, it was more to do with the public power, political power, the organization, the sense of finite, the sense of human measurements, as well as the proportions that would relate to the parts of the building. So this was the basis in which the Roman cities were designed. So they went by modules, they went by scale, they went by the module repetition of the modules and the sale and the place of assembly such as the marketplace or the baths became the nodes of development. Whereas in the Greek cities, it was a town design, it was a organic design designed for 10,000 to 20,000 people, and see and street is not the principal element, it is just the leftover space which was catered for circulation, and the place of assembly which is the market space or the agora which formed as a focal point in certain places, and the radiation of the streets happened from that point into the between the human settlements. So let us see first the Greek cities. The Greek cities had established the planning principles, and the cities were of two forms. One is the old cities such as the Athens, which had irregular streets and gradual organic development, and the new cities, which were colonial cities established during the Hellenistic period, had gridiron pattern. So certain things were common in the Greek cities such as the Acropolis, the Agora, the town, the fortification, etc. So the typical Greek city included villages, fields, orchards and woods. And in the upper part of the city, the Acropolis was located. In the center of the city stood the temple of the local god, and then in the lower portion of the city were the houses and the other buildings. And then the most Greek cities were had defensive walls, that is, it had fortification. So the agora was the central place, and then the Acropolis was located, around which the public buildings were located, and then the lower parts formed the residential colonies, and it had a defined fortification. So the agora is a market space where trade happens as a core function, as well as the meeting and social gathering of the people was the emphasis of this agora. So the Greek city is called as a pole. The Greek city state is called as a polis. Most of the Greek cities grow around the citadel. So the site planning and design was centered on the appreciation of the building from the outside. So the agora was the most important gathering place, and it is usually a flat ground for the ease of communication. So the Acropolis in Athens is one of the religious precinct located on one of the hills of the city. So the topography was also taken into consideration while designing of these cities, because the placement of this public space or the religious precinct was located at top of the hill, and the other settlements just proceeded downwards. So the town is where the people lived, where the new town is called as a Hippodamus. While Athens we saw was an organically grown town, Hippodamus was a designed one. It was Miletos. It was designed by Hippodamus. So this Hippodamus town, as it is usually referred to as, had proper grid iron patterns, and it was edged on one side by peninsula river rather than orienting into the cardinal points. So he divided the city into three zones. The northern was the residential area, the agora in the center, and the residential area towards the south had the larger blocks. The only missing area is the temples, and the cities, though it was well defined, the streets were very narrow and it was winding. So the Roman cities, now that we finished on the Greek cities, let's go into the Roman cities. And the Roman cities had more public spaces. We already have learned in the history of architecture the kind of public spaces such as Thermae Caracula, which is the bath, the Circus Maximus, which is the race, and you have the Colosseum, which is a theater, open air theater, and you had the Pantheon, etc. So this was to establish the kind of political power as well as the intense religious and economic social activity which was in vogue. So the urban layout of this Roman cities such as Pompeii and Herculaneum reflect not only the historic development but also the relation to the feudalism, that is the hierarchy of the political power that existed during that time. And besides all this, the most important aspect is the infrastructure development, that is the laying of the water pipes, bridges, and the buildings and the roads. So it was technically more in a sophisticated manner because of the because it got evolved after the Greek cities. So it took a lot of lessons from its predecessor. So the four principal gates or the cardinal gates were clearly located in the city, and that was the point in which the cities were actually entered from. So the public baths, the theater, the temple, the library, the forum, which is the market space, and then the public baths were located in every four quadrants, and besides the blocks of residential blocks that were located in between them. These residential blocks were called as damas. So in Pompeii, if you see all the pink that is related over here is the residential block, and if you see, this is the road which is from the northwest to the southeast, and one portion is this is the river that is like flowing. So this forms the edge of the city, and everything happens towards this. So the area covered is approximately 66 acres. Only two-thirds has been excavated till now. Pompeii was accessed by 7 gates, and the streets were laid out in gridiron pattern, and it was mainly axial. It's called decumani, and it was crossed by minor roads, which is called as cardini. So each residential block was called as an insulae, which was about 35 into 90 meters. So uh, uh, there is another city called as Timgad. So Timgad is actually it's a city that grew in the middle of the 2nd century, and so the first settlement was smaller, but it was uncovered by the French archaeologists. So the Colonia of Trajan appears to be the one with 29 or 30 acres extent, and it is diminished by a space needed for public buildings, though it is not easy to tell how great this space was in the original town. So the block themselves measured about 70 feet, 70 feet, and contained one or more or four pieces of residential buildings into it. So the streets were divided into blocks 15 to 16 feet wide, and two main streets ran with principal gates. So this is the forum, and then the gridiron pattern of roads that ran perpendicular and parallel to each other, and each of this contained four pieces of residential units or two pieces of residential units. So this is referred to as a chessboard pattern, and there were 12 such blocks from east to west, and it was led by four principal gates in the cardinal direction. So, around the 5th century, Roman Empire disintegrated because of its show and luxury of its rulers, and cities lost importance and socio-economic disturbances followed, and cruel rulers started establishing city-states. The feudal system slowly emerged, and this period can be called as the Dark Ages. So, the medieval cities in the European Middle Ages took many forms. So, the northern Italy had partial democracy, while in Germany it had free cities. So, this was the political background briefly. So, the type of locations that took place during this medieval time was the farm towns in Scandinavia and Britain, and fortress towns in Edinburgh, and church towns in York and Chartres, and merchant prince towns in Florence and Siena, and merchant guild towns in Hanseatic league towns, etc. So these were the places where towns started getting established. So, based on the evolution, there were some four categories of towns they said got evolved. One is the planned town, next is the multifocal town, the third is a walled town, and the fourth is the Carcassonne. So the planned town has laid out with straight streets intersecting at right angles, which is nothing called as which is called as the gridiron pattern. And the planned European city was restricted to those that were derived from the Greek and the Roman towns. A multifocal town is a number of small villages together, crowned around the village, have merged together. So different institutional nuclei such as castle, cathedral, monastery, market, one complements to the other. Every village had something of importance. So all these villages function together as a group of settlement to form a town. A walled town is a town which had fortification, had long walls. The Hellenistic towns were walls. So the Carson town, it contains a market square, a castle or a church, and from where Other streets and residential areas originated because of the importance of this particular aspect. So the next is the medieval cities. So the medieval cities we already saw was the origin was a cathedral church or a cloister, whether it can be a monastery, it can be a fortress or a princely courts or a marketplace or a free settlement which existed very organically, or the historic towns, usually Roman towns, etc. So this was the basis in which any town or a city, etc., had functioned. So if you see, this is a representational manner in which a city or a town can be defined. So this red spot is the city, and there are towns which are around it, and there are market towns around these cities, around which there are some settlements which are functioning. So all these market towns have made this into the core point which becomes a city, and these towns have some special functions together which are forming as nuclei around this common central nuclei. So the medieval cities are located in irregular lands such as hilltops or islands or etc. So the few main roads were used for the vehicle traffic, and the rest were majorly pedestrian movement because of the automobile invention by then. As by then was very scarce. So as the town was restricted with fortified walls and the houses were built in rows and narrow streets, the open spaces behind the houses were used for domestic animal rearing and cultivating gardens or workshop, store, etc. So these streets were usually paved and there was no facility for waste disposal, sewerage, etc. So later, from Perennius, which we saw, the first one, which is called this planned town, to that of the Olynthes, to the roads, etc. The evolution of the towns started from the insula with one with the infrastructure, etc. And finally, the evolution of the contemporary cities took place. So, first, let us see the contemporary cities in India before we get into international contemporary cities. So, when the Britishers first settled in India, they found that the towns were very unhygienic, and the outskirts and the independent colonies were located in the outskirts of the existing towns, and these extensions were called as cantonments or barracks. Like, for example, Bangalore was a cantonment to Chennai, and Shimla was a cantonment near Delhi, and Kodaikanal was another hill station near Chennai, and Matharan was near Mumbai, and Darjeeling was near Kolkata, and other cantonment examples were Delhi cantonment, Agra cantonment, Bangalore, and Ahmedabad. So, since the climate was too hot, they also located some hill stations near these cantonments, which served to act as a resolute or a refuge or a weekend time for the Britishers to settle during the weekends or during the leisure period. So, the first decade in 20th century that took the work of the building of New Delhi, and the plan was prepared by Edwin Lutyens. He also designed the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The industrial buildings were separated from the residential sector. Lutyens also contributed in making the Connaught Place, which is the common area of having a circular plan. So the post independence after 1947, J.N. Nehru, uh, the then Prime Minister, invited Corbusier to visit India to develop cities. Hence, Chandigarh was planned by him. Roorkela and Jamshedpur were also planned by him. So the towns were planned based on some industrial functions like the steel towns such as Durgapur, Bhilai and Roorkela. Industrial towns like Jamshedpur, Bhadravati, Chittaranjan, And capital cities such as Gandhinagar in Gujarat and Chandigarh, Punjab, etc. The cities like Gandhinagar, Navi Mumbai were also planned by Charles Courier in this period. The other cities like Lavasa, New Nasik, and Aurangabad were coming up after this. So let us see the evolution of Delhi. So in 1911, when the British government shifts capital from New Delhi to Calcutta, the construction of New Delhi starts. And then in 1914, Edwin Lutyens was the chief architect and a planner, and he came up with a rectangular plan. And later, he planned the secretariat was planned by Herbert Becker, and then the Connaught Place was designed by Robert Russell because of the central business district. So India gains importance in 1947 in Delhi as a capital, and the Viceroy House becomes the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the new meaning was given to all the buildings, and it was coined as New Delhi. So the growth of Lutyens Delhi. Initially, this was the first phase. Later on, it grew in like this, and later on, it was planned like this. So the capital was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi in 1911. So the controversial partitioning of Bengal in 1905, the road to right to vote between Bengali Hindu and the Muslims, and Delhi's geographical position in the center of North India, roughly equidistant to Bangalore as well as Calcutta, and Delhi's historic importance because of the seat of the Mughal Empire and the Hindu Mahabharata era of Indraprastha, etc., and the political need to re-articulate the British power. That's exactly the reason why in 1911 from Calcutta the power was shifted to Delhi. So a foundation stone was laid. So the initial design um, for the new design, the pattern and settlement was actually a hexagonal pattern with many cardinal points. So this was the basic concept and the central axis in the center, based on which the circulation paths were laid. So every cardinal point of the hexagon meeting together becomes a node. From that node, however, we had the paths, and then the district was established, and the public spaces which already existed, and also some new public spaces were recreated, and then the landscape was laid out, and then the landmarks were established such as your Rajpath, your Rashtrapati Bhavan, etc. So it was purely geometrical, and three line streets radiate from the central vista, converge into hexagonal nodes. So this was the one line concept, he said. Three line streets. So from every point, three line, 1, 2, 3. So three line streets radiate from the central vista, and they converge into hexagonal nodes. So this was the basic concept in which they had started to work on, and then they finally established the final concept, which has this. So this is the 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, 1, 2, and 3. So these two big hexagons converge in a central path, and this central path is the Rashtrapati Bhavan. We already spotted this as the concept for serial vision. So the layout of the Lutyens Delhi was governed mainly by three visual corridors linking the government complexes with the Jama Masjid, Indraprastha, and Sadar Jung Tomb. So the plan reflects the transdecent favor of the geometric symmetry of triangles and hexagons. As I already repeated, we have 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Three lines which converge in the center, and a hexagon is formed. Any hexagon can be joined by three lines, and many hexagons are oriented besides the central axis, and so a symmetry is established, and within these hexagons triangles are getting formed, and all six triangles culminate to form compose to form the hexagon. So Latian's plan was also remarkable for its general green spaces, lawns, watercourses, flowers, fruit-bearing trees in the avenues, parks, and he had his novel idea was to include all the natural and historical wonders into the city. So the road network had potential of increasing their carriage. So the original design of the road network has a capacity of carrying about 6,000 vehicles, and also it was designed for future expansion of potential of increasing its carrying capacity. So the network of roads were diagonals and radials at 60 and 30 degrees. So in any hexagon, if you see, it is either 60 or 30 degrees, which is obtuse or acute, we all know. So this is the when we see on the zoning, this was the government complex, this was the bungalow zone, and this was the commercial area, which is the Connaught Place. So the imageability of the city. So the imageability of the city ranges from the look and feel of the city. We already brought into the perspective of the observer's thought or a thinking perspective or the perception of a particular image of the city, which is to be guarded with the help of a historical image, a natural image, as well as an image of political power. So this was established well with the help of the Juma Masjid being the historical image, the natural image with the help of the landscape, and the political or the image of authority and power with the help of the buildings of power such as your Rashtrapati Bhavan, etc. So this was defined broadly by parts, nodes, districts, landmark and edges, and the element interrelationship. So the parts, the channels in which the observer customarily, occasionally, potentially moves, which are streets, avenues, walkways, channels, etc. Nodes are the meeting points of the three lines in the center which form the focus. So this focus is either a roundabout or a large square or traffic roadways or a central district or a commercial place. Landmarks such as India Gate uh, and place these kind of gateways were added in order to make it memorable for a viewer. So the districts, the sections of the city were conceived into two-dimensional aspects which the observer was mentally can recognize in common, such as the commercial district, the government district, as well as the residential or the bungalow district. So the edges of the paths were mostly railroad cuts or shores or walls or fortifications, etc. So no element exists in isolation. The elements simply have the raw material of the city image. They are patterned to provide a satisfying form. So this was a plan of a contemporary city. Now, why did I jump from medieval cities such as Rome and Greek cities to that of Delhi is that for us to understand how the planning existed in historical times and how the planning existed in the modern times. In modern times, also, the place of political power, the place of commercial district, and a public place was considered as a prime importance, but the development of the paths and the road networks and the infrastructure was in a systematic, technical, as well as had more pronounced, but unlike in the historical times. But even in the historical times, if you see the agora, the acropolis, or the baths, or the common public spaces, etc., were made as the focal point of development of these towns. So, From this, we understand that the role of the public spaces play a very important role in the development or the evolution of any city or a town. So now let us see how the public spaces were coined with names, and this happened very prominently during the Renaissance period. And Renaissance began in Florence in Italy in the 15th century, and the Renaissance period spread in 1500 to England, Germany, France, etc. So Renaissance planning was very symmetrical, and the placement of the monumental buildings, obelisks, statues, landmarks, etc., were found a lot of importance. So the traffic space was very much demarcated from the pedestrian space. Traffic space is usually the horse-drawn vehicles, and the pedestrian space were clearly demarcated. And the residential space intended for low access traffic with predominantly pedestrian and recreational sources. And the third is the pedestrian space where wheeled traffic was normally excluded. So these were the three types of spaces that Renaissance town had carved out of their cities. So the monument at the end is recompense, as it were, for walking along a straight road, and economies were met by keeping the fronting buildings plain so that to enhance the climax private simplicity and public magnificence. So these cities were planned with a very conscious skyline development of making the viewer very thoughtful and very introspective of what is coming after one another, instead of keeping the buildings only in the front line interesting. When people penetrate into layers of the city, they found more interesting elements. So this ideal city concept during Renaissance found its first diagram of planning of the cities. So this is called as the utopian ideal. So this city had outer earthworks, meaning it had a fortification with a moat around it, and the outer fortified point with a town hall in the center. And the town hall was the basis of development of these Renaissance towns, and the streets and the roads were radiating from that. So next important aspect in Renaissance town was a square or a plaza. So this square or a plaza was coined because of the place where people meet. Um, so the first urban formation of a square or a plaza was 6,000 years ago, and the city squares were established at where two roads were meeting, and it served as an opportunity to exercise the power of the rulers with military procession and parades. So two examples of the squares which even today are very magnificent were the St. Mark's Square in Venice and St. Peter's Square in Rome. It creates a gathering space of people, it providing them with a shelter against the traffic, freeing them from the tension of rushing from the web of the street, and it's a psychological parking space within the civic landscape. You tend to park yourself in a place where you can be free from the web of the traffic. At the same time, it provides a place of communal or a patriotic co-gathering space where you can look at the parades or the social activity that is taking place, and it brings people together. That was the intention of an urban square. So this urban square was actually developed because of the climatic condition where they needed a large open space so that they could get a respite from themselves from the cold climate. And so societal structure and psychological attitude of the people to have a social gathering and then to have a public life and to have natural local community activities and representation, etc. This was one of the reasons where people can go for a strike, etc. The urban square was formed. The factors that formulate the square is that on relation between the form of the surrounding buildings. The surrounding buildings gave it a shape or a form, their uniformity or their variety. Because of the functional activity that is taking place, it took a form of variety, and their absolute dimensions or relative proportion, as in they wanted to have a magnificent square, as in the St. Peter's Square, or a gathering space such as a St. Mark's Square, and the angle of the entering streets. So this marked the factors that formulate this square. That is, when you have, like, for example, in Lutyens' Delhi, we always had three lines crossing at the center, and you have a street common space that is getting formed. When you have two crossroads, it is entirely different. So based on that, the form changes. Based on the surrounding buildings, it form changes. Based on the activity within that, the form changes. Based on the width and the length of the open area available, the form changes. So all these factors led to the formulation of the square. So the square were mostly hardscapes suitable for markets, music concerts, political rallies. And it always had some relics such as your obelisk or a clock tower or a fountain or a statue kept in the center, so that it marked a place of uh, a, a focal point with a landmark. And now we shall see the evolution of modern city concepts. So after the Renaissance period, there were many theories and concepts that were earmarked because of the advent of the industrialization that took place, the globalization that took place because of the invention of automobiles, as well as the social lifestyle and the occupation of the people changed because of the industrial revolution. These towns and cities took a change, and many concepts were oriented towards that change. They said we wanted to do only a city for industries, so industrial towns came up. So similarly, many concepts had come up. So we shall see one concept from the other. So the Industrial Revolution marks the change of the agriculture, manufacturing, mining, transportation, and technology, etc. So it was a shift from farming economy to that of the manufacturing economy. So this was one of, because of this, that led to rapid growth in population. So people moved to areas where occupation was a prime commodity. So people wanted to live in areas where place of work was available, occupation was available, and place of work was nearby. So because of this, there came the formulation of cities and towns and villages. So the change of industrialization brought about cities, and the size of the cities had increased because of the presence of the factories. So the living conditions had to be considered with safety codes and without sickness because of long working hours and dangerous conditions. So there was tensions in the class between the rich and the poor. The rich was mostly the people who were in the manufacturing field, and the poor were the labor class. So the first concept by Tony Garnier was established in the year 1917, called as the city industrial, where the culmination of several philosophies of urbanism had taken place. So this was first established in France, southeastern France, where with hills and lake to the onto the northern side and the river valley towards the south. The plan was a consideration to run a socialistic city in which the residential areas, the industrial areas, the public agricultural areas were linked by circulation patterns, both vehicular and pedestrian in nature. So this was the old town, and there was a new town that was established between the hills and the river, and the hydroelectric station was located here so it can serve the power, supply the power to the industry. Residential areas with social amenities such as hospitals as well as some transportation facilities were established in these areas that had formed a focal point of developing the cities, and this was called as a socialist city because it provided amenities to all the classes of the public. So the public zone that was set on the plateau, which was like in the manner of the Hellenistic Acropolis, where the government buildings, museums, exhibition halls, sports, and theatre also found into place. The old town is near the railroad to accommodate the tourists, etc., because of its historical background. And the plan itself is clear in Beaux Arts, natural informity. But this plan had a lot of lacking in terms of courthouses, jails, etc. So somehow it was only there in conceptual form. So later came up this concept called as, after the city industrial came up city beautiful movement, introducing beautification and monumental grandeurs in the city. So such beautification can promote harmonious social order that can increase the quality of life, and the critics complained that the movement was overly concerned with aesthetics in spite of social reform. Though aesthetics was given a lot of importance, social reforms were laid back. So that was the complaint of the City Beautiful movement. So later on, Ebenezer Howard, a man who brought about a change in the urban planning perspective through his garden city concept in the year 1898, and he brought in this garden city concept because initially there was another model called as a Burgers concentric model. So the Burgers concentric model is this one, where you have the central business district, and then you have the industrial district around it, and then you have the residential zone, and then you have the commuter suburbs. So if the commuters have to pass to the central business district, all have to travel from one zone to the other into the to reach the place of work. So this model was considered as a failure model because everyone had to travel to the central business district and it was overcrowded. So that was one of the reasons why he required a change, and that led to the invention of his garden city model. So this was the garden city model, where this garden city was the center of the origin of this town or a city, and there were radiating roads that were originating from the center, and around this garden city were important buildings such as your library, your theater, your galleries, the government buildings, etc., and surrounded by a central park. After that, all these things are residential, and between residential areas are located grand avenues. So between the residential area and the central business public space is the central park, and between the residential area he made garden avenue, and the industrial areas, the places of work, etc., was thrown to the suburban areas, beyond which there were dairy farms and then large farm. large forms. So this diagram was actually done by Louis Mumford, and he co-worked with Ebenezer Howard. And this is the idea of modern planning. So from his garden city concept, uh, there are some key words that we need to remember. One is open planning, and then he spoke about nothing was gained by overcrowding, like in the Burgers concentric model. People all concentrated, or like people all culminated in the central business district. Nothing is gained because of that. And then antithesis of suburb. What he means by that is that don't look at suburb because it is in the outer region. It is also a place where people can move out and work, uh, and all of them can enjoy the right of good quality living within the city with good amenities such as your place of power, central parks, galleries, libraries, theatre, common amenities, etc. So the garden city is a compact, rigorously confined urban grouping. Urban and rural patterns should grow together. So he established another concept called as green belt concept. So the increase in population and wealth in big centers paradoxically resulted in destitution. So no city's income was used for sanitation, maintenance, and slum clearance. So, so he said that it is more important to create a city which functions on a socialistic perspective rather than a democratic or a bureaucratic perspective. So also he spoke about the streets which were stealing in a lot of spaces, and it is called as garden robbing. So he spoke about nothing was gained in overcrowding. Then he spoke about garden robbing. Then third one is the green belt concept. Then socialistic planning. Then he spoke about antitheses, and then urban and rural areas should grow together. So these were the six concepts. So, Ebenezer Howard, a book, Garden Cities of Tomorrow in 1902, came up with a concept of three magnets, such as town and country. So, this this diagram is what we saw already in color. This is one of the quadrants of what we saw, and this garden city concept is a garden. This is a country area where the population is around 32,000, and then this is the central city which has the population around 58,000, and this is again a country. So this is a town, this is a country, and this space between the two is the town and country. So these are all countries, garden cities, and this is the central town, and space around it forms the town and country. So the new cities were supported by core urban cities as satellites, and central city of 50,000 people to house 32,000 people in the satellite cities. So this central city was around 50,000 plus, and this is for 32,000 plus. So 32,000 city was 6 acres in nature, and 6 radial boulevards of 37 meters wide were established, and the green spaces and pedestrian spaces, central shopping area linked by public transportation. So this was the basis of development of his concept, where he had 37 meters wide radial roads with central parks in between, and this was linked by public transportation to these satellite cities, each of 6 acres, which served a population of 32,000, and this central city was 50,000 in nature. So Letchworth was one of the garden cities that was developed in 1903, based on his concept, where you can see the central city and the suburban city, and it was all linked. This is the central city, and these are all the satellite centers, and these are the avenue roads that you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this was the first garden city in a small scale theory that got realized, where a clear path was established between the vehicular movement and the pedestrian movement, with greenery, nature as the prime aspect. So Verkale, Budapest, was another city in Germany, which was also developed as a garden city. Um, it also had this concept of radiating roofs, but not in hexagonal pattern, but it had a pattern of its own. If you see this this was the pattern in which it developed. It was actually cardinal in nature, but between the cardinals also the avenue roads actually radiated. So this was also a very functional concept, with avenue roads and residential blocks were defined. And then this was Budapest. Um, this was the beginning of, and then they had a lot of characteristics, and they defined architecture in the residential areas, etc. So the way of integration of functions of uh, um complexity, where they had a cultural house, the system of leaf collection and other rubbish. So they began to think about deep infrastructure, and this was a maintenance center for vehicles, and this was another important house, which, and all of this had a same social architectural skyline and a fabric uh, which is very well planned and developed. So after the city industrial and city beautiful movement, and in detail we saw the garden city movement, the next concept that came up was the Radburn concept. The reason why the Radburn concept came up was because of 6 points: to promote environmental consideration, conserving the open spaces. The second important aspect is the self-contained settlement, by providing all the important amenities such as playgrounds, schools, theaters, public buildings, stores, religious buildings together in the settlement itself, putting the factories and other industrial areas uh, nearby, so the wasteful transportation can be avoided, developing collective services so that it is providing a lot of comfort to the individuals, and arrange for occupancy of the houses on fair basis of cost and services, and also to make the place of man's habitation and industry to fit the health requirements of daily life in the same area. The idea is not to travel for to great distance to work. At the same time, considering the health of the individuals or the habitants in mind, the industries have to be located strategically. So these were the 6 ideas in which Radburn got developed. So what is the concept? The concept is, first of all, separation of the pedestrian and the vehicular movement, and development of the super block, that is a large block around main roads, and then cul-de-sacs, where grouped houses were grouped around cul-de-sac. So what is a cul-de-sac? So this is a cul-de-sac. You go here, you turn around and you come, and their houses are all grouped around this. So if this is not a through road to something else, people will stop traveling on these main roads. So this road will cater only to this residential block. So the living bedrooms, etc., should face the gardens, and the service areas should face the roads, and the remaining lands such as the park areas, uh, have to be culled out of these residential areas, and the walkways were designed in such a way the pedestrian areas can reach social places without crossing automobile street. The idea of Radburn concept was that a child should travel to school or to a park without getting interfered with an automobile road. So this was the concept where you have the main roads, and around the main roads were large blocks, super blocks, and then this is a road with a cul-de-sac, and this road will serve only to this residential block. So this was a residential block, this was a residential block. So each of this entire block was called a super block, which was 300 meters by 600 meters. So it was inspired by the Garden City, but it had some of the points which were improvised from the Garden City. It has 25,000 people in 150 acres and 430 single houses, 90 row houses, and 54 semi attached houses, and 93 apartments. So they came up even with an architectural plan, and the planners were Henry Wright and Clarence Dane. So mostly Radburn's concept was also called as the Clarence Dane's concept also. So uh, and Henry Wright had six plans for the housing platform. So the plan usually didn't have an individual property lines, but adjusting the pavement, sidewalk, and the sewers, etc., which was a pattern of division. Like compound wall concept was not emphasized, and then the buildings were arranged to give sunlight and air, which was tolerable to the smallest to the cheapest, to even to the smallest and the cheapest house. So social equity, and provide ample sites for playgrounds, schools, theaters, churches, public buildings, stores, etc. So this is the concept of a self-contained community. And also places of car parking was allotted so that people have to park their cars and walk to their houses, unlike that automobiles were let into the residential roads. So private and public land um, was brought together, uh, and with interrelation to each other, such that the services add to the comfort of the individual. So the occupancy of the houses must be in fair basis uh, of cost and service. So the important features of this Radburn concept was the hierarchy of roads with division between the main roads which had the super blocks, then the interior roads, and then the roads which cater to the residential areas with and footpath systems, and cul-de-sac, which was a concept, underpasses, so that like you can cross the road without um, unlike your zebra crossing, you have to take the subway to cross the road without interfering with the automobiles. So the ideal size of people was 25,000 to 30,000 in 150 acres. So the clustered super block was another feature, and mixed use, that is, every residential community should have daily needs store, a small church, and a neighborhood school, so that people don't have to travel out of the self-contained community. And then the park, uh, so they also established how much of distance anyone can walk. 1 mile walk to school, half-mile walk to shops, and then high school and commercial school is 1.5 miles. So they came up with that kind of concept as well. So this led to another concept which is very important, is called as the Clarence Perry's neighborhood concept. So the neighborhood unit was conceived with comprehensive physical planning with self-contained residential neighborhoods promoted as a community-centric lifestyle away from the noise of trains and sight of smoke and ugliness of the industrial plants. Unlike the Radburn concept where industries as well as the residential areas coexisted with each other but with strategic planning, this was planning a neighborhood away from the site of the industries but a self-contained community. Center the school in the neighborhood so all the students, all the children can walk equidistant to the school. Place the arterial roads along the perimeter. Arterial roads along the perimeter. Central school. And design internal streets with hierarchy of local streets and arterial streets. Restrict the shopping areas to the perimeter so that even people who are traveling in the main roads can make use of the shops that are located. And then dedicate at least 10% of the neighborhood to parks and open space. So the elements of Perry's neighborhood planning was residential units, schools, shopping centers, traffic roads, railway stations and open spaces. So school should be in the center, around that is a residential unit, and arterial roads where in the periphery with the railway station and the cardinal points, and then the open spaces should be at least 10% and the shopping center should be located in the periphery. So this was the concept of Clarence Perry's neighborhood concept. These were many neighborhoods, and this was a subsidiary shopping center, whereas these are all local shopping centers. And this is the old main shopping center, and this is the old village center, and these are all the residential units within the shopping center, and the central spots are all the schools. The main schools were located for two to three neighborhoods together, and these were the main roads that were in the periphery of these neighborhoods. So this was the concept of Clarence Perry. So the purpose of the neighborhood planning is to make people socialize with one another and to share the public and amenities and recreation facilities equally, and to have a safe and healthy environment and efficiency of the road users, and to improve recreational amenities and community prospects for the future. So these were the important features of the neighborhood planning. Then came in the City Nova, New City. So City Nova is an apartment block which we have already studied in contemporary architecture, and this is the drawing that was developed with three street levels, tram lines, automobile lanes, pedestrian pathway, wireless telegraph, etc., with external elevators, galleries, and covered walkways. So they came up with skyscrapers with all the amenities surmounted to each other, at the same time covered walkways to protect the pedestrian pathway. It was very utopian or very futuristic in nature, and hence it was called the futurism as well as City Nova. This was something which was developed only in the industrial age, because the requirement to place the tram stations, the requirement to come up with elevators for these skyscrapers, and for construction of bridges to suit the focal points of the contemporary urban life. But it spoke very less on open spaces, public spaces, etc. So, the celebration of speed and dynamism of modern contemporary life was the main focus of this, and it fused different modes of transportation like the air and the rail, and also it had dedicated places to like walkolators, etc., to move from one important place to another. And this was the vision for many metropolises such as New York, etc. Um, the mechanical components were most important aspect of developing this City Nova. So in the modernism period came in the development of the contemporary city concept by Corbusier, So he came up with many skyscrapers, which was also one of the inspirations from City Noir concept. And he came up with a plan called as Plan Voisin in France in 1925. The vision to bulldoze the North Paris and replace it with orthogonal street grids and park like green spaces with super blocks. That is, he had come up with gridiron pattern of movement with that of super blocks and green spaces in the center. So then came in this radiant city, or the La Villa Radius, a city for 3 million population, where there are four basic principles where the decongestion of the city center. This was Le Corbusier's concept um, um, of four principles where decongestion of the city center and to come up with a radiant city and increase the density levels with the help of these super blocks or these skyscrapers. This was actually the housing, and then this is actually hotels, this is the railroad, and then this was the business center, and this was the factories. So the factories, and then there was this green belt, then housing area, then hotels and amenities and recreation, and then the business center which was located here, and some satellite towns. So this was because of enlarged circulation, increased open spaces of parks. So garden city concept was also taken into consideration. Neighborhood planning was also taken into consideration, and then Radburn concept was also considered, and he came up with this radiant city. So this is how many cities got evolved because of these theories and concepts that developed during each period of time. So this was called as a parkland city. It was called as a green central buildings were raised in stilts to allow unbroken panoramic views. That is, he raised the entire city by stilt, and he gave it dedicated for the car parking, and it was like free view was given in the ground floor. And then it had some points which were lacking, which were the human scale was out of proportion, because these blocks were easily 20 to 40 stories in height, and the malls were alienated, and people had to go and shop only in a particular space. um, the high rise was actually introduced because high rise had to be introduced, not because there was lack of land or something like that. High rise was breaking the social ties and the community development between people, like how in apartments that we don't have a social bridge, unlike in residential areas, etc. So post this, in new towns where uh, brought in 1960 with Garden City concept, and the World War II rehabilitation plan, decentralization, displacement of the population for case of employment, and many suburbs and satellite towns were developed in Virginia, Columbia, Maryland, etc. In postmodernism in 1970, three people, American planners and theorists and philosophers, Jane Jacobs, Christopher Alexander, and Robert Venturi, came about with concepts which we will be seeing further down in the third chapter. Jane Jacobs spoke about the death and life of great American cities. Christopher Alexander spoke about the pattern language, and the timeless way of living by Robert Venturi was to break the social inequity among the people and bring about what is called as racialism. So that was called as uh, the postmodernism concept in 1970, and later In the present, we speak about sustainable cities, cities with social and ecological health, and cities of tomorrow. And a sustainable city is a compact, efficient land use, less automobile oriented, efficient resource use, and to restore the ecosystem, allows community participation, improves the health of the people, and sustainable economy. So, this was the ideal sustainable city, and after which we came up with three important concepts such as compact development, no need to travel long, pedestrian friendly roads to put less burden on automobiles, take up public transportation, and neighborhood centers, mixed use planning, and this was termed as new urbanism. The present day concept of the city, such as smart living or smart cities, to involve concept of smartness, to include the aspect of smart nature into the cities, are in vogue. But to understand this, in all these concepts, theories, philosophies, and historical evolution and morphology of urban centers, what we see in common is the development of the urban space with public space playing the major role. So now we shall see the role of public spaces in urban morphology in the next lecture. Thank you.